Now it should work. Can send. Yes. Okay. For some reason, it didn't unmute me, so I'll start over again. Hello and welcome to the Foreman Birthday event 2023. So it's 2 years ago. Yeah, I found it. I was not unmuted. So yeah, welcome to this edition. So I was pretty nervous before. Yeah, now I have to don't send desktop audio to the stream again. This is only needed. So now it should work. And yeah, so 2 years ago, this was the last time I did this event. This means in Foreman we had 8 releases, or in Katello it was 7 major releases. So pretty much, yeah, big changes because it was 2.5.1. Puppet was still not a plugin, and so on. So we had some changes. Also, I think we have seen community members leaving, new community members coming to us. So yeah, I hope we will see familiar faces, we will see new faces today. There's a social event again, so if you are more interested in the community, join the work adventure and yeah, just chat around. There's also the chat. You will see any chat messages going live here in the stream. So just join and yeah, be live. I forgot what I wanted to say to you also. So just let's add Noffa to the stream so she can also say hello in the name of the Foreman project. So Noffa, give me some seconds. I have to bring your audio on and the video. So now you are on.
Yes, hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, and I hope the stream can this too.
Me too. That's great. Okay, yeah, so hi everyone. If you can't hear me, please speak up. Meanwhile, I'm going to say that I'm really excited to celebrate this event, and I'm happy to see all of you who joined us. So I hope that by now everyone here knows me, but for those who don't, I'm Nofar, a Foreman developer, and for the past 8 months, I've also been moderating the Foreman community demos. And now I realize that I have my camera off, so hi. Let's see, sorry about that. So today we're celebrating a very busy year, the first year since COVID when the conferences returned to regular non-virtual events, well, except for this one, but yeah. And I'm thrilled to see our community growing and improving, and I can guarantee that we are constantly working on the new and better improvements for the community and, of course, the Foreman project itself. And let me say that if you have any thoughts you want to share about the demo, anything you would like to see there, I am the right person to reach out to. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you, the community members, and seeing you virtually on the demos, and maybe even personally in one of the conferences. Yeah, that's it. Lastly, I would like to express my gratitude to Derek for hosting this fantastic celebration. So thanks a lot for all the hard work, Derek.
Yeah, I think we have to thank the speakers because I just have to press buttons now because everything is prepared, and yeah, every arrow now is on me. So yeah, it should work everything now. So thanks, Nova, for also your welcome. I will switch back to me only and then start with the first talk. So first talk will be Christian. He's giving us a talk on his lessons learned from many projects, and unfortunately, or for him, not unfortunately, he's on vacation today. So he will not do a live Q&A. He wanted to try to be in the chat to answer questions, but haven't seen him yet. So perhaps he will join. If not, I promised him to forward any questions. I will also try to push every link he is mentioning to the chat. So if you have any questions, answers you will get later. And if you have any interest in things he's mentioning, I will put some into. So just let's start with the first talk.
Hello everybody and welcome to my talk, Foreman Lessons Learned, Automated Installations and Hints. I'm Christian and I'm the technical lead for Linux at SVA, one of the biggest German IT system integrators, and I mainly focus on Linux, virtualization, infrastructure as code, and automation. I started my Linux system management journey with Spacewalk back then in 2014, and I also started with Foreman in 2017, so it has been quite a journey for me. I'm doing a lot of Linux system management projects, and today I want to share some customer insights with you and also some tips and tricks and lessons learned from various projects. I'm also the host of the German Focus on Linux podcast. So it's basically a German podcast, but sometimes we also have English episodes. But today we're going to talk about Foreman, as this is the Foreman birthday party. So first of all, thanks a lot for all the great people working on this fabulous project, and I really enjoy using it, and yeah, all the best for the next years to come, I would say. Have a look at the agenda. So first I'm going to share some customer insights with you. Then I will talk a little bit about automated installations and documentation. And the last part will be sharing some tips and tricks with you. Let's start with some customer insights. So when we're talking about Linux system management, we basically have the four horsemen of tools available. Obviously, we have Foreman and Katello, but we also have still Uyuni. So Uyuni is a fork by SUSE and a community of Spacewalk. It has been crafted 2018, and a lot of technical things happened since then. I think everybody knows that Spacewalk was the upstream for the Red Hat Satellite 5 project. So since then, and since the Uyuni community took over the project, they did a lot to improve UI and UX. They also integrated Salt as an infrastructure as code utility, and the tool supports a broad range of Linux distributions. I will talk about this in another slide. We also have Landscape, which is the tool by Canonical that has been introduced 2007. It has a very limited feature set, I would say. It's also only for Debian-alike systems, which doesn't mean that it's not a good tool. So if you have a very unique and easy system landscape where you only want to manage your Ubuntu systems, that's totally fine. But in comparison with Foreman, it has a very limited feature set. I also wrote a review about that tool, so have a look at the link if you are curious what this might look like. And lastly, we also have the Oracle Linux Manager, which is the last tool that has been introduced in this kind of software. It's mostly irrelevant, I would say, because it's a fork of an outdated Spacewalk version. So precisely it's a fork from Spacewalk 2.10, which was EOL'd in May 2020, so it's quite old and it doesn't look like a lot of things happened since then. So the only thing I saw that has been changed is that the PostgreSQL support was replaced with Oracle database support. But beside that, it's the same UI. It hasn't added any new features. There's a Git repository online, but I haven't seen any activity since the last couple of years. So I also wrote a review about that tool. So if you're interested, to check out the link. The next question is, why do customers choose Foreman? So basically it's because of the modularity. Foreman has a broad range of plugins. It's more than 100. So a lot of add-ons for hypervisors, cloud providers, infrastructure services such as IPAM tools, and it does a great job regarding this kind of modularity, and that's what customers love about Foreman. The content staging has been a USP for a very long time, so freezing patches that you tested and stage them to your development machines, and after a couple of weeks propose the exact same software packages to the production environment is quite easy with Foreman. So we have a web interface for this, and this makes things easier than doing it on the command line, which was the only way to go for some other tools like Spacewalk back then. So that's a great improvement. Customers also love the automation possibilities, so it came for historic reasons with Puppet. It's still available with Puppet, but we have plugins for Ansible, for SaltStack and Chef, and customers love this. So they can pick the tool that matches their needs best, and Foreman easily can support it. Customers also like that provisioning bare metal in virtualized hosts is quite easy using the single pane of glass. So we have one interface. It doesn't matter whether I have a local VMware infrastructure or Azure and other cloud providers, and maybe I also have some bare metal I need to provision over the network. I'm using the same user interface for all these system types. That's quite neat. Also, role-based access control is very important to customers. So there's a good set of preset roles that can be easily adapted, and it's quite easy to integrate with LDAP and Active Directory. So this can be done in a couple of minutes. It's no rocket science, and it works like a charm, and people really like this as well. Other tools need to go for PAM for central authentication. So for example, for Uyuni, you would need to integrate the whole system using PAM into Active Directory as far as I'm concerned. So the integration in Foreman is way easier then. But sometimes people don't go for Foreman. This doesn't mean that Foreman is a bad tool. Obviously, it's a great tool. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this very vivid community and birthday parties. But sometimes customers try to use something different. And I thought maybe this could also be interesting for you. So mainly, when there are customers that don't go for Foreman, the reason is complexity. So basically, we are mixing Foreman and Katello terms sometimes. And for some tasks, the UI and UX is kind of overloaded, mainly because of massive menus and submenus, and people get lost in those selection of menus and items to choose from. So regarding the wording, on the Foreman side, we have hosts, and on the Katello side, we have content hosts. We also have host groups in the context of Foreman, and we have host collections in the context of Katello. I know this is due to historic reasons. First of all, we had the Foreman project, and Katello has been a plugin and now is the broadest used and the most important plugin, I would say. So we know that there's a reason for this, but new users don't know that, and they are quite confused when they get started and need to figure out, okay, where need I go to have the host, and why do I need to go to the content host view in order to do these tasks? So this is sometimes for new users quite confusing. And another reason might be the distribution support for non-Red Hat distributions. People also still get confused with the concept of content views and composite content views. I know we have this preview in Katello 4.8.0 with having multiple content views selected to one host, and I think this is going into the right direction, because this makes things a lot easier for new people, because it takes some time for new users to get the content view concept, and when I'm talking about composite content views, people are really getting confused again. So this is a great idea, having the possibility to simply assign multiple content views. And also people really like the new host and content view user interface that made things way better. It has been a real struggle with the old interface for new users, and people really like the new user interface you just made. And I also love it. It looks great. It's very simple to use. Great job. Another question people ask quite often is, should I go for a vanilla Foreman or maybe for an enterprise variant? Of course, we all know the kind of standard consulting answer. It depends. It really depends, but maybe let's get started with the enterprise variants. Of course, we have two of them. The first, obviously, is the Red Hat Satellite, the enterprise variant by Red Hat, but we also have the ATIX or Carino utility, which is also quite useful. And my answer usually is use one of them if you need to have support. For example, you have some SLAs you want to see covered, and you really need someone you can call or write a mail to in case you need help. So, of course, for the vanilla variant, you also have the great community, but it can take some time until you get an answer. So if you need SLAs, go for a supported variant. And sometimes you may not want to deal with bugs and regular upgrades. So this doesn't mean that Foreman is a buggy software. It isn't, but of course, it shows new features and things that might be covered in Red Hat Satellite at some stage. So it could be possible that when there's a new feature, that maybe also a new bug is part of the upgrade. So you really need to ensure that you upgrade your systems maybe more than one time in 5 years. So if you don't want to deal with regular upgrades, you can also go for an enterprise variant. I encourage customers to have a look at Ocarino if you have more than just RHEL machines. So, of course, if you have Red Hat Satellite, it is mainly designed for using or maintaining RHEL systems. Of course, you could also manage other systems, but don't try to contact the support if you have any issues with it. Of course, Red Hat can't support the broad range of Linux distributions out there, so I do not want this to sound like a complaint, but some customers don't have a single vendor strategy. So for example, some customers have RHEL, they have SLES, they have Ubuntu, they have Amazon Linux, and so on and so on. And people really would like to have one tool to manage all those distributions. And for this case, Ocarino is a really great tool to have a look at. Talking about non-Red Hat support in Foreman, we need to clarify that by default, Foreman only supported RPM-based distributions back then. So the task of adding Debian support was started by ATIX, and this was the reason why I got to know the people back then, because I had a Debian-based home lab and I wanted to use Foreman to maintain all my systems, and I saw that it's not that easy to do that, and I saw that there are some folks from a German company that are part of the Foreman community, and they are developing this. So this has been a great experience in seeing how this feature got implemented. Thanks again for that. People really like that, and our customers also like that. And currently we have the official Foreman client packages that are only available for Enterprise Linux 7 to 9, so RHEL, CentOS, Alma Linux, and so on. And there are still packages for SLES 11, which sounds kind of crazy because it went end of life back then in 2019. We have packages for SLES 12, but no packages for SLES 15, which has been around for quite some time. So if you have non-Red Hat distributions, this means that you need to manage required packages on your own. So speaking of these packages, what would you need on a non-Red Hat system in order to maintain it using Foreman? You need the subscription manager package, you need Katello host tools where we have some add-ons like the tracer plugin, and for Debian-alike machines you would need to have the apt transport Katello package. It doesn't sound like this is a big job to do, but maintaining these tools on your systems and compiling new versions can be quite daunting, and people don't want to do this manually. They want to get rid of this manual tasks. So I figured out that there are some unhandled issues of feature requests in the community and the bug tracker for SLE 15, for Debian, and for Ubuntu. And I don't know whether this is planned for the future to have official client support for these distributions, but as of this recording, I was unable to find them. I know that there has also been a Python tool for adding Katello repositories to Debian host, which was called deb subscription. That looks kind of outdated. I saw the last update was back then in 2019. So maybe that's another good idea to still use it these days. And customers really want to have proper packages for system relevant configurations. They do not want to compile this on their own. And this is exactly the gap that Ocarino fills. So Ethics Ocarino is an enterprise utility. So people pay ethics to do this kind of maintenance of the packages, to be honest. And I decided to start a thread in the foreman community and pointed out that these packages are missing. And ethics luckily decided to ship the clients public, which is a really, really great sign and task in my opinion. So thanks a lot for this. That's a really great opportunity for non-Ocarino customers to use vanilla foreman alongside with modern distributions. So they shipped or uploaded the packages to their website, oss.atix.de, as you can see here. So what you would find here is packages with the subscription manager and other tools like Katello host tools for recent versions of SLES, so namely SLES 12 and SLES 15, and Debian and Ubuntu. So thanks again. That's really, really awesome. That's why people and I really love open source. And sometimes people really want to have a deeper look at whether they should go for Foreman and Katello or Uyuni, which are also mentioned in the beginning of this talk. So I do not want to compare those two tools. Both tools are great, don't get me wrong. I just want to show you what some of the customers think when they have never used Foreman and never have used Uyuni. So let's talk about what their first experience is. So basically, Uyuni is often considered as a good enough alternative over Foreman because it's less modular, but also less complex, but still very useful. So some customers really don't need that broad range of plugins and integrations into hypervisors and cloud providers and so on. Some smaller customers just want to have a simple utility to get started and maintain the loads of systems they have in their system landscape. And this is a good use case to also have a look at Uyuni. So it offers a broad range of distribution support, like I just mentioned. It's not for non-Red Hat products only, so you can manage systems like CentOS, Rocky Linux, Alma Linux, and so on. Of course, obviously, we have OpenSUSE and SLES, but we also have Debian, Ubuntu, Amazon, Alibaba Linux, and so on and so on. So why should you have a look at Uyuni over Foreman? You could use it if you don't need that broad range of plugins, as I mentioned, if you do not want to do VM deployment with your system management. So let's say you do this manually, or you have a different tool like Terraform or some self-service applications that are also quite common these days. You could use it if you don't need Puppet or Chef, because Uyuni comes with SaltStack, but also has experimental support for Ansible. So if you are a heavy Puppet or Chef user, this tool is not what you would like to have a look at. And Uyuni also doesn't offer this thin provision software repositories. So things that we know in Katello as on-demand download policy aren't available there yet. And this is a real USP for Foreman and Katello, if you ask me. So let's say you have a system landscape with a lot of Debian distributions you need to maintain, and you only have servers, but you need to download all the packages. So you need to download Wayland, X11, LibreOffice, the Doom emulator, and so on. All those packages you don't need because it downloads the whole repositories. And this is a killer feature in Katello, in my opinion, because you can save a lot of storage and bandwidth. So if you need that, Uyuni is not the tool for you. But basically, if you're really just into system management and want to do install patches on your systems and have a neat tool that gives you the possibility to also automate this, Uyuni should be good enough. So maybe this helps for some ideas how Foreman or Katello could maybe become some easier to use in the future. Okay, that was a lot of customer insights. Let's get started with the automation of installations. So basically, as I said in the introduction, I'm a really lazy guy and I do not want to reinvent the wheel. Because manual work also leads into unnecessary errors, as some of you might also know. As I said, I do a lot of system management projects and customer setups are quite often comparable, so there's no need to start over for every customer. Luckily, the Foreman project offers two great Ansible collections for this. So for example, we have the foreman-operations collection, which basically does the installation and handles upgrades and so on. And we also have the foreman collection, which is basically day two stuff. So you can maintain the content, you can create users, you can manage content views and so on. And I really like that because everything you can do in the CLI or the web interface can also be done from Ansible playbooks. And it's quite easy to bootstrap the whole installation and day two process in one playbook or a set of playbooks. In accordance with that, we also should go for a proper documentation format that can be Git controlled, because when we are writing Ansible code in order to do the installation, we want to keep track of version changes and new features we add, and it would be great to have those changes also part of the documentation. So don't go for Word or other tools, but have a look at ASCII-Doc or maybe MKDocs if you're more into Markdown. The first rule of automated installation is configure everything using Ansible. So don't do any quick and dirty exceptions. So 5 minutes before lunch break, doing this nifty little change in the user interface instead of the playbook, this is not going to be a great idea. Ansible should be your single point of truth. So do everything in the Ansible code. In your documentation, it would be good if you reference the YAML files and the playbooks and roles and everything you do on the Ansible side. So don't copy that playbook into a different folder where your documentation belongs, because in the end you would need to track changes in two directories, which is quite daunting, and errors can be made quite easily. I'm a big fan of Markdown, but maybe you also want to give ASCII-Doc a try. It has proper variable substitution. It offers various exporters. For example, there's an PDF exporter, and it's way more capable than Markdown for comprehensive documentations. Don't get me wrong, I know there's MKDocs and you can do very comprehensive documentations also in Markdown. That's what I'm also doing for some of my side projects. But I think you do not want to hand over a Git repository with thousands of Markdown files or HTML files to your customer. You want to have a proper PDF with a watermark of your customer name and so on. So I think ASCII-Doc is quite useful for this, and it's a good idea to have at least a look at it. And this is what I do for all my customer setups. So one example we see here, that's an extract of the customer configuration. So I have one central file where I configure all the customer related information. For example, I have the author name, so the name of the colleague that actually writes the documentation. We have the name of the project, we have the release date, the document version. So when this document version is handed to a customer, we have of course also the name of the customer, the address, the street, and so on. And we also have information regarding the Foreman installation. So the big benefit of ASCII-Doc is that it has variable substitution that works quite good. So I put all the Foreman related information into that configuration file. So this means the host name, the FQDN, the IP address, netmask gateway, NTP, and so on, the name of the Foreman organization, and so on. This means that all the documents that describe the installation aren't hard-coded anymore. I just reference the variables, and if I have a new customer, I can simply copy the most of the documentation, change variables, and I'm good to go. And this is a great way of saving time and doing proper quality work for your customers. So here's another example, which is an extract of the source code of a particular chapter where we're talking about prerequisites. Of course, for Foreman also DNS validation is key. So what we see here is on the left side, we have the extract of source code. So this is basically shell code. So these are obviously two shell commands you would enter in your terminal for checking NSLOOKUP output. And we have starting and ending tags. And we also have here the type of the programming language, which is useful for syntax highlighting. So of course, ASCII-Doc supports the usual languages like Markdown, C, Java, Golang, and so on. And what we can see here with subs attributes is that in this source code, I want to substitute the variables. So for example, we have here the foreman IP variable and the foreman FQDN variable, which are part of the customer configuration, as you can see here. So I just need to change the variable here in one central position, and in the documentation, this will look quite nice. So this is what we can see on the right side. That's a screenshot of the actual PDF that has been generated for the customer. We see the chapter mark. We see a short description what this code actually does. It's used for DNS validation, and of course we have the shell commands with the substituted variables and a neat looking hint that we really should double check whether these information are correct, because we know DNS and firewall is always the reason for errors, don't we? Okay, so that's the documentation. Let's have a look at Ansible code that can be used to automate this installation. So here's an extract of a playbook which can be used in order to install a foreman server. So usually I have a dedicated Ansible inventory where I enter the IP address and login credentials for the systems I would need to install foreman onto. Of course, we need root privileges in order to install applications. And below we see that we use two roles in order to do the installation. The first is the foreman repositories role, which is part of the foreman operations Ansible collection. So this does all the package manager configuration for you. Basically, you enter the foreman repository version you would like to install and the Katello repository version you would like to configure. So this just points to the current repositories. So have a look at the quick start manual on the foreman Katello website, where you would always see the latest version of foreman and Katello. Enter those versions here, and this role is going to configure everything you need to get started. There's also a role for the Puppet repository. So in case you also want to have Puppet support, which is also still needed these days as far as I'm concerned, because otherwise installation wouldn't work. You can also use that role in order to configure the Puppet 6 or 7 role, depending on the version you would like to use. The next role is the installer role we use here. And here we can configure the installer scenario we would like to use. So according with the documentation, this would be the Katello installer scenario. We can also specify the particular package name. That's part of the foreman Katello repository we need to install. And we have the possibility to assign multiple installer options. So those are basically the command line options in accordance with the Katello documentation you can assign in order to have a proper pre-configured system. So you can set the initial administrator username and password or the initial organization. So for example, here I've set an admin password and an admin organization. So simply run that playbook, go grab a coffee. It takes something around 20 to 30 minutes, and after that you should be good to go and have a proper installed foreman and Katello system you can start using the web interface. It's really good, and I use it for projects for a long time. It has been a great experience so far. Okay, so after we install foreman and Katello, we maybe also want to add some content. And this is where the foreman collection also can help heavily, because there are Ansible plugins or modules for for really everything you can do on the CLI and the web interface. So for example, we can use the product plugin in order to create products. We can use the repository plugin in order to create repositories. We can do the same for content views, for sync plans, and so on and so on. You get it. You can do everything also using the Ansible interface. And the documentation is quite good. So there are good examples that explain pretty good how to use the module. Basically, this is shown out on the slides. You would also define here the host name of your foreman system, the administrator username and password. So you don't need to execute that playbook on the system that also hosts foreman. You can do this on your notebook or a management host. And you only need to have the foreman Ansible collection installed in order to control the access to the API. So the first task we see here, it is used to create a product with a sync plan. So of course we have the name of the product, we have assigned the proper organization we just created, and we also reference a sync plan, which is daily 5 a.m. in this case. So this is a sync plan daily on 5 a.m. All the products that are listed there will be synchronized. And the next task in this example is creating a repository. So we have the name of the repository, we have the content type. So it could be YAM, it could be deb, and so on. Also, we mention the product, the organization, and the URL where the packages can be downloaded from. Later in this presentation, I will have a link to a GitHub repository where I documented the whole foreman installation, including content, for one setup. So you can have a look at the code there. There will be an additional task, for example, for configuring GPG keys and so on. But I think this describes it quite good, that there are good Ansible modules for getting started with this. So I also have some smaller tips and tricks for you, so maybe this also helps. Let's start with design tips. So basically, think about deploying a dedicated proxy, or capsule as it's called in the Red Hat Satellite context, for production landscapes, even if you do not have a big setup. Yeah, so even if it's a medium-sized environment or maybe a smaller setup, you know, things can grow quite fast. So let's say you start with a little system landscape of 20 to 30 systems, maybe. In 2 years, it could be 200 or 300 systems, or even more. When you deploy a single instance system, you basically have foreman and Katello on your system, but you also have a proxy. Yeah, so, but having an additional proxy could also be quite useful, because let's say you have one single instance system and you have, in the meantime, multiple hundreds of systems you need to maintain using it, and you need to do a reboot because of a fail backup job, because of you want to install updates on that particular system, and so on. There are many reasons for this. This means that in this time where your foreman server is down because of the reboot, nobody can install new patches or packages. So even if you're on the managed systems and you're running YAML install, then of course the system would talk to the foreman server, which is down at this moment. And this can be quite annoying if you have some colleagues that are really don't want to wait this 20 minutes until your reboot has finished, or yeah, so it could be quite useful to have a dedicated proxy which does the patch management for you. Of course, it's also a quite good idea to enable the TuneD daemon. So if you have physical servers, enable the throughput performance profile, and for VMs, enable the virtual guest profile. And I really need to mention it, flash storage is king. I know flash storage isn't that expensive anymore these days, but I recently had a customer that was still using spinning Rust. And installing Foreman and doing the first sync and patching the first systems was really a big difference in comparison with flash storage. So if you have the possibility to have flash storage for your Foreman and Katello server, use it. You wouldn't regret it. If you really have big landscapes, so multiple thousands of servers you need to maintain and patch, have a look at the satellite performance tuning guides. So there's a knowledge base article I linked here, which points to the performance tuning guide for the particular satellite version. So I think starting with satellite 6.8 or so, they are part of the official documentation. Previously, there have been some very special PDFs created by the Red Hat Satellite engineering team. And those documents are quite comprehensive, and they list specific tweaks for particular satellite services. So options for Apache in order to tweak performance, or options for the database in order to make things more fast, and so on. So only use it if you really need it. If you do not have any performance issues, don't use it. So don't do it because it's cool. Really just do it because you have a proper use case for it. And I really need to say things are way better since MongoDB was removed. So I've been a satellite user since version 6.0. I started with the public beta and migrated from satellite 5 to 6.3 3 back then. So this was the first production system that I had, and performance was really problematic in the early versions. But since we do not have to deal with MongoDB anymore, things are way better. Performance is just great in comparison with it, and customers really like that the performance has gone so good. So if you create a new content view version or sync a repository, it doesn't take ages. It's really, really snappy and fast. Awesome that you did that. Regarding automated installation, so you really want to use proper Ansible version pinning. I think maybe some of you know this, that you can have a requirements.yml file, as you can see in the bottom of this slide, where you can link roles or collections, and you can define proper versions you want to pin to. So for example, as of recording, the version I was using in my setup was the foreman collection 3.12.0 and the operations collection 2.0.0. Why should you do this? Let's say you do an installation of your foreman and Katello server, and in 3 months you need to set up another system on a dedicated environment, and you want to use what you prove that it has been working for you. So you do not want to use latest and greatest even for automation stuff. So this is why you would go for version pinning. Of course, after some time there will be new Ansible collection versions, and of course there will also be new foreman and Katello versions you want to check out and upgrade to. But it's basically a good idea to have a proper versioned deployment process that you really know, that you double check that it worked for you. If you want to set up Red Hat Satellite, they are also official collections. So as we have foreman.foreman and foreman.operations, we also have redhat.satellite and redhat.satellite_operations. Those Ansible collections are available in the Red Hat Automation Hub, which would require you to have an Ansible automation platform subscription. For customers that do not have this kind of subscription, they still can use these collections because they are part of the Ansible collection Red Hat Satellite package. I think that started back then with Satellite 6.9 or something like that. So for recent versions, 6.13 is the newest version, this should work for you. And I double checked it for the latest version. It also worked for me. So have a look at this, because this is the supported variant of it. In case you have any issues, you can create support tickets and Red Hat will have a look at it. This does not apply necessarily to the upstream collections. Some of the useful content of those community collections. So in the foreman.foreman collection, you might want to have a look at the content view version cleanup role. It removes all content view versions and it replaces the Katello CV manager you maybe heard from or may have used in the past. That was a nifty, fine little Ruby tool that cleaned up older versions, because if you have automated patch downloads and from time to time you also release new content view versions, yeah, you still have the old versions and they can fill up your hard drive and your system quite fast. So this tool helps you dealing with it. You can, for example, say just keep the last 5 versions and older versions will be removed automatically. And it's basically a good idea to execute this regularly. So you could do a cron job, or if you have AWX or Ansible automation platform, you can have a scheduled run that does this maybe one time in a month. And we also have the convert to rel role, which assists you with migrating your CentOS systems to rel. And in the operations collection, we have the backup role, which helps you with configuring backup properly. So that should also be part of every installation, in my opinion, to have proper backup. So have a look at this role, it helps you with this. Another thing that I really love is the foreman dynamic inventory. So there's a plugin that offers dynamic inventory, which means that you do not need to manually specify your Ansible inventory. So of course you could do that, but you can also create the configuration for this dynamic inventory. And I really need to clarify this. The file name must have the .foreman.yml postfix. It is not going to work if your inventory has the name homelab.yml. It should be homelab.foreman.yml. Believe me, it took a couple of hours for me at some time when I got started with this. And the solution was so easy. I just forget the foreman in the middle of the file name. So that's why I'm saying this here. Double check that your file name postfix is proper. Otherwise, the dynamic inventory won't work. So when you use this dynamic inventory, all the host and host group informations are gathered in real time using the foreman API, and configuration is quite easy. So basically you see here, we of course need to specify the plugin name. We need to specify the URL for our foreman or Katello or satellite system. We need to assign a username and a password, but we can also specify host filters. So for example, in this particular configuration, we are limiting hosts of a particular organization. Have a look at the documentation. There are other very valuable examples for you to get started. And as I mentioned, of course, I have some demo code for you. So I was talking a lot about documentation and how to use the Ansible collections to spin up your foreman and Katello system. There's an example on GitHub. There's a vagrant box that simply uses all the collections I just showed you in order to spin up a foreman and Katello installation. I also have some documentation examples. So this is quite the boilerplate I use for my projects. Have a look at it. Let me know what you think. So feedback and PRs are always welcome. So maybe this helps some of you if you also need to do foreman and Katello installations quite often. Let me know what you think. And thanks a lot for having the possibility to talk at the foreman birthday party. So as I mentioned, keep up the great work. I really love this product, and it was a pleasure being here. If you would like to listen to topics like this, you can do this every 2 weeks. As I mentioned, I'm also the host of the Focus on Linux podcast. We have an episode every month where we talk about the news. We also talk quite often about foreman, Katello, and other tools. And in the middle of the month, we have special thematic episodes. So we have been talking about the Red Hat Summit recently, about Proxmox, about Nix, and so on. So if you're interested in that kind of things, as I mentioned, it's a German podcast mainly, but sometimes we also have English episodes. Check out where you usually get your podcasts. And thank you again for your attention, and have a great foreman birthday party.
So thank you, Christian, for your talk. As I said, he's on vacation, so no live Q&A for this one. And I think we have fixed all the technical issues we had. I also found which of my buttons for unmute is working and which one is not. So everything should work fine now. And so let's directly dive into the next talk from Bastian, who is talking about the Ubuntu provisioning.
Hi everyone, hope you're having a great birthday party so far. I'm Bastian, and I would like to talk about provisioning Ubuntu hosts with Foreman. But first I want to give you a short introduction about myself. I'm Bastian Schmidt, and I'm a master's student at the TU Munich, and I'm working at Artix since 2020. And in my time at Artix, I've mostly been working in the past on Foreman Salt, but this nowadays shifted more towards Ubuntu provisioning. And as an outline of this talk, first of all, I want to give a short motivations, what happened around the topic of Ubuntu provisioning. And then we talk about 3 main issues that arise and how we solved them. And then afterwards, we have like a short outlook in the future. So how can we automate things better within Foreman? But first, I actually want to talk about the Ubuntu provisioning or the provisioning process in general. So when provisioning hosts or Ubuntu hosts, we usually have like these 3 entities. On the left, you can see ubuntu.com. So we kind of need a source where we actually get our operating system from. Then we have a foreman, and connected to this foreman, some compute resource where we then want to deploy a virtual machine on. And the first thing you do in Foreman, usually I would say, is setting up an installation media. So therefore, we actually need our resource. So where do we get the files from, such that we can provision a new host? So we make this request to ubuntu.com, and they say, sure, we have some boot files and further installation files such that you can use them. And what foreman does is it stores the boot files at the foreman instance itself, or at the smart proxy actually. And then we also have the install files, but we just have them like as a reference. So the installation media, I would say, is actually a reference to where the install files are stored. That's why I have this little star here. And then with these files and these references, we can make our templates. So on the one side, we have the PXE template here as an example, which then contains the boot files and a reference to another template, which I call here the Debian installer template. And then right beneath, you see the Debian installer template itself. This one has then the installation or the reference to the installation files and contains mostly a setup on how you can then actually install and configure the host that you want to deploy. So with these templates, the next thing to do would be making a request to our compute resource, and thereby we use the PXE template. Then the compute resource sets up a host machine and uses this and passes the PXE template to the machine and uses the boot files here. So when the machine comes up, then the first thing it does is asking for the Debian installer template using this reference. So this reference is actually just URL to the foreman where some host can retrieve the templates from. So here the host asks for the Debian installer template. We provide this one within foreman, and then at some point when the installation runs through, we came up with some Ubuntu host, hopefully. And everyone is happy in the end. So this is kind of the process, how it used to work with the Debian installer, and is very much similar to how Debian machines are deployed. And that's actually how Ubuntu machines have been deployed for quite a while, because Ubuntu supported this Debian installer until release 2004.2. But then with 2004.3, this kind of technology or provisioning tool, Debian installer, has been replaced with so-called auto-install. And auto-install is a new tool which comes with like some changes that are like quite different from the Debian installer. So first of all, or the first kind of issue we ran into when using auto-install was that during this first request, while setting up the installation media, we couldn't easily retrieve those files anymore because the file layout here changed. So detecting these boot files from our from a source like Ubuntu.com wasn't that easy anymore. Then second one is that with auto install there come new types of templates, and we also had to change existing ones. And last but not least is installation medium must be passed as an OS image file. So usually we had this reference to the install files before, but on the host side with auto install, you can't just pass it that way. You actually need to pass an .iso OS image file to the host such that it installs from this. And these are like quite some changes, and I'll just show the process then with this new auto install tool then. So still we have the same entities, ubuntu.com, foreman and our compute resource, and we make the same request again. And Ubuntu still says, sure, I can give you like some kind of installation media, but not the boot files directly. I'll give you the .iso OS image. And this kind of was the first issue we had with foreman, and where nowadays, if you want to provision an Ubuntu host, the user actually has to make some, has to execute some commands manually, because foreman can't, as of now, react to retrieving an .iso file. But what can we do? We provided some instructions such that the user knows how to extract the boot files from this OS image, because they're actually in there. And then we can put them in the corresponding directory in foreman again, or such that foreman can then detect those files again. And then we make up our templates out of these. But you might see that it already changed a bit. So now we have, as I said before, different types of templates. We still use PXE, but it kind of changed. So we have our boot files still, yes, like before. But now we need a reference to a so-called user data template. And we also have the reference to the install files. And in the user data template you see below, there is now just like the setup described and not the install files here. So the install files kind of changed from being down there in this other template and have been moved, or this reference to the install files have been moved in the PXE template. But as I said before, we can't use those install files anymore really. So what we need to do here, or what we need to provide, is the .iso image. So we actually want to have the ISO image available on our foreman and then keep a reference or put a reference in this PXE template. Then we can continue. So just like before, make a request to our compute resource, provide the PXE template. The compute resource sets up a host machine, which then uses the PXE template and the references we have here to first get the user data and also get the ubuntu.iso image from our foreman. We provide these, and eventually at some point the host comes up as an Ubuntu host. So everything fine again. And now I want to show you like a bit more detailed how we accomplished these changes such that the boot process now, or the provisioning process now, works as I just showed you. So first of all, the first issue we had was detecting the boot files. And this hasn't been kind of a new thing because Ubuntu tended to change it before actually such file layout. But until Ubuntu 18.04 and like prior releases, we could just go to archive.ubuntu.com, use this URL as an installation media, and then within this URL, there's like a specific path which we could follow, and then we would find our boot files, which means the kernel file, Linux, and the initial RAM disk file. But then with Ubuntu 20.04, this changed slightly already, and we could just adapt these changes within foreman. So I think in the beginning of 20.04, Canonical didn't want to provide those files already, but after some feedback from the community, they would still provide these, but under a different path. So as you see in the middle, it's not like current images netboot, it's current legacy images netboot. And we had to adopt this change in foreman as well, such that we can detect the boot files. And this worked for 20.04.1 and 20.04.2, but then with 20.04.3, they finally completely deprecated this kind of method, and they also don't provide those boot files publicly via HTTP. So what we can do is download the .iso OS image, and within these image there are the boot files. So technically they still provide them, but not as easy as it's been before. And within this image there's also a different path now, so it's Casper / and here the file names as well changed. But these were like, I'd say, kind of more easy changes. So file names and paths we can kind of easily, I'd say, adopt within foreman code. But the fact that they don't provide those files and the user actually has to download this image and extract it because foreman is not capable of doing it, needed some documentation. And that's why we added this documentation here, creating an installation medium for Ubuntu 22.04. And here it's described how to download those files from the official releases.ubuntu.com and then extract it to some location. Yes. And that's kind of how we accomplished this first issue we ran into. Second one is providing new templates, and this one was not like a single PR, as you can see in the short clip. It was more of a process, such that we get like the templates back to the same capabilities that the Debian installer template has been before. And I talked about it before already. So what we need now is kind of new template type, the user data template. So on the left, you can see a typical Debian installer template. And on the right, you see the user data template. And the Debian installer template on the left is mostly consists of such di commands, which then configure the host or the virtual machine. And actually, this template is not like 44 lines as it's shown here. It's like way longer, I think like 120. And on the right side, the user data template is actually that kind of a concise YAML file as it's shown here. Yeah, so that's kind of a bigger change, but as I said already, it took like a couple of iterations such that we get the user data file the way we wanted. And another change that we had was providing new templates on the PXE side. So the PXE template also changed slightly. So some parameters stayed the same, like hostname, domain, and so on. But we needed additional parameters because now, as I said before, we have to provide two things within PXE. One, a reference to the .iso image, and second, the reference to the user data template where then the host can download it. So therefore, an additional parameter has been added for the user data template. And a parameter we had before already, this URL parameter, is now used to pass the OS image, actually, yeah. So that's it for the templates. And now the last thing was that we still need to deliver somehow the OS image. And therefore we also, or I want to point back to the documentation we had before, because here it's on one hand side it described how to extract the image, but we also advise people to put the .iso image at the same location here, such then in the template we can easily reference the .iso image. Yeah, and that's it. So now we can provision Ubuntu hosts again. But yeah, the question mark is here, are we actually done? Because within the community, I think there is like there have been a couple of threads popping up regarding Ubuntu provisioning, because this whole process is not as smooth as it's been before. There are some manual changes you have to do, or some extra setup, which hasn't been the case before. And that's why last year we made a proposal for like how we can actually manage this in the future and automate it better, such that the users have like a better experience here provisioning Ubuntu hosts. And what we did was this proposal, this RFC in the community, to enable foreman to manage OS images. And this proposal actually has been implemented, or we implemented it. And it's now a couple of pull requests that are still like under review and kind of in a development process. But I would like to give you a development kind of sneak peek into this tool and how it works. So I actually just give you a short demo, and I prepared some stuff here already. So on the left you see my foreman instance, and it has like some configuration already. And on the right hand side you see two terminals which are connected to this foreman server. So first thing I want to show you is the operating system. So you had to do this, this setup you have to do either way. So already as of now you have to configure an operating system, which is documented as it is for every other operating system. But two things I want to point out here is that you have to pay attention to the partition table. So here we actually need the preset default auto install one. And also for the templates, you have to use the specific auto install templates. So I'm going to use a PXE Linux deployment here. So I'll use the preset default PXE Linux auto install. We also have some for PXE grub, and I think there's also one for iPXE nowadays. So we need some PXE template here. And then we also need to provide the user data template. So here we have preset auto install cloud init user data. So it's just important that you configured these correctly. But now the change that comes with this new feature is that as an installation media, I have like two set up here. One is like my default one, which points to this extracted OS image where Foreman detects the boot files from. But with the feature, I can actually use a different one. So I'll use the Ubuntu 2204 ISO installation media, which I just set up here. And what comes now is that instead of providing or having to extract an image and put it somewhere, with this new feature of Foreman, we could just use the path to an ISO image. So here I have the default Ubuntu release page, and I can just have a look here, copy the link to the official OS image, and put it here as a path. And then I just submit this one. And now we want to deploy a new host. So I just go here and create a new host. And I think I just name it like here, demo Ubuntu 22 ISO. I have a host group configured already. And then the important thing here is that under the operating system tab, I use as an installation media the one that we just created. And before actually submitting the host, I want to give a little bit more insights about the backend or what actually happens when triggering this host creation or provisioning now. So on the right, you see my terminals. And on the top, you see that I'm in the path former proxy TFTP system images. This is kind of a new path that would come with this feature. And this is the location where actually Foreman then downloads the OS image to. So as of now, you can see that there's nothing in there. So we'll actually just have a look at whether this one is created when we start the process. And that's actually what I'm going to do now. So I'll just say submit. And now we can see that most of the steps are run through, and it kind of hangs at this fetch TFTP boot files, because that's when on the right hand side we see there's a file created and actually downloaded. And while it's downloaded, I want to have a look at the folder down here and see whether there are any files for Ubuntu. And now they are not, because this is the TFTP boot directory. So this is the folder where Foreman stores its boot files. And now we'll just wait a second until the process completed, because we see, okay, our Ubuntu OS image has been downloaded successfully. And what happens afterwards is that Foreman now also is capable of extracting the boot files directly from the image. So I'll just check this folder here again, and we see that now we have the boot files here. And on the left, you see already that our host has been provisioned successfully. And now let me just check for the host, because my vSphere, such that we can see where the host is actually deploying, and I have it here. So yeah, this is like the default provisioning process. So the machine is now actually installing. So the extraction and so on worked. But as I said, this tool is like still under development, so some things can change still, but yeah, therefore we're in the review process at the moment. And yeah, that's pretty much it, what I wanted to show here. And yeah, in the end, I just want to say thank you and thanks a lot. First of all, for your attention, but also for the great help that we have from the community. So most of the templates have been provided by people from the community in the beginning, and then we were just like fine-tuning these or adding like new features, and it's actually been a lot of fun. And yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you, Bastian, for your great talk and also for the great work. And give me a second and I will bring you online. So sound should be online and now we should also see you. So
Nice.
you're
Yeah.
now live. So
Hi.
I haven't seen any questions, so your talk was so good. No one has any further questions. So my question would be, of course, when will this feature be ready? Because I think many people will be waiting on this. Are there any issues you are waiting for that has to be solved?
Yeah, so actually it's been around for a while now already. So the PRs were, I'd say, ready for a while. And we're kind of waiting for a bit like more review from the community here. But I think the priorities have been not on it for the moment. That's why I also like want to put like a bit more attention on the topic here, such that we can make the whole installation process a bit smoother again. Yeah.
So, and what is next on the to-do list? Is there anything else left for Ubuntu or anything else you need or want to do?
No, I think like with this feature, we at least get rid of those steps that you nowadays have to perform manually. But I think from the community side, I think we kind of have to decide whether this is, I think, the way we want to go. So, for example, one thing that's still like kind of has to be decided, I think, with the feature is that, as you saw in the demo, maybe the first time it just downloads those this image file and then puts it on the smart proxy that the host is corresponding to. And in case we have a new smart proxy or like a different one that you want to provision a host for, it would now again use the installation media address and download the address from there to that smart proxy. But I think there are cases where smart proxy don't have internet access, for example, and therefore I think we have to kind of still decide on how to handle such cases. Yeah, so I think there are like some cases where we still need some feedback and gotta decide how we handle those. And this is like the first kind of prototype, I guess, but there are like one or two like open questions still. And as you saw also, for example, the deployment process is now like stopping at the fetch boot files because we added it as a additional step for this boot file fetching. And I think maybe we still can decide on how to make this better visible, that there's actually like now not just boot files, but an actual OS image, which is like way bigger than boot files being downloaded. And that's the reason why you gotta wait the first time when a new host is deployed. So yeah, I think there are like still some topics UI-wise maybe, and also for these edge cases open, where we would then like some feedback from the community in these cases.
Yeah, so I see in the YouTube chat at least one you convinced to try the provisioning out. So yeah, I hope you will get feedback. Quirm also posted the link to the pull request. So it's a still open pull request. So everyone, please try, give some feedback, so we can have this up and running. So
yeah, great, thanks.
No further questions I see. So if you want to add something, now it's your time. If not, we will have a short break and then we will have Ewoud.
I actually just would like to point out another time what I said in the end. So thanks a lot for the help we got from the community with this whole, especially with the templates. The first version came from them, and especially me learned a lot how open source can work here, and I think in the end everyone benefited from it. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So there was also now a question from the YouTube channel on 22.4. Yes, it will work from 22.4.3. This is the one where auto install was introduced. So this should be the one, the new option is needed and working. And yeah, it's, no, sorry, 20.4.3 was this, and 22.4, this is everything with auto install. So yeah, it will be the new way of Ubuntu installation until they change it again. So yeah, I originally have planned for a short break here, so everyone can grab a cup of coffee, tea, or what you want to drink, get a bio break or something like this. Then we will have Ewoud. He will do his talk live because he was just a bit out of time to prepare everything and record it. So he will be up here. I already see him in the Jitsi session, so I can't bring him live. But yeah, as I also have an addition to the last talk, let's not have a too big break. So Ewoud, just tell me if you're ready, and then I will bring you live. And yeah, let's wait at least a minute or something like this so everyone can have a break. If you haven't joined, join the social event at Work Adventure. There are already some people at this part of the event. I hope the one who asked for Arduino users already found the the ethics guys there. So I think this should work for everyone. Also, you can be more active in the chat, so I have more to talk, but yeah. So, Ewoud, if you're ready, just tell me and I will bring you live. And if not, we will be waiting. So I see the the presentation, so I will switching again, and then I have to look where I can get my face out of the way. So we can have Ewoud now doing his presentation live. So perhaps we will be then before time or after. So let's see how long he needs. And yeah.
Is my audio okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, so your voice should be also on the live stream.
Good.
On my mic, I should increase. Probably I should just talk louder because on the audio meter, I'm just hitting the green and the yellow. But if I'm too quiet, please tell me again. Yeah, so I hand over to Ewoud and I try to find where I can remove my picture. It should be here. Yep. So Ewoud, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Today I would like to talk about foreman-documentation. It was, as mentioned, a bit last minute, so I'm presenting it live. But at least I'm not teasing the demo goals by doing a live demo, it's just a presentation, so should be okay. About myself, my name is Ewoud Kohl van Wijngaarden. I've been involved with the Foreman project for about 10 years, so you've probably seen my name somewhere. I started working out on Puppet modules, which turned into an installer, and these days I work at Red Hat on the satellite platform team, which means we look at a broader product. This typically means integration of things and looking at the big picture. My most recent focus areas have been the upstream release process, which you can typically follow on this course as well. We try to make it very transparent to everyone, very repeatable, because it's something that happens all the time. And you might have also seen some work that I focused on the translations. And the next area I'm looking at is documentation. and hence this presentation. So first we're going to look at the big picture where we are. Then we take a closer look at the foreman-documentation, which is the new repository. And since no project is static, we're also going to look at how we can make changes to it. And as always, a bit of a future improvement, which is sort of the thing I'm looking at right now. Where are we now? A quick history lesson. The Foreman manual was created in 2012. It was shortly after Foreman 1.0 released. Those of you who weren't there, that's a long time ago when it was still very new. Things were quite different. You might have also seen that the plugins were not really there yet. It's all there were different days, but they were a lot of fun. Then in 2015, we also added the plugin manuals, and I'll talk longer about it. But yeah, suffice to say, the current plugin manuals are not well maintained. And the last is the new documentation, which is the main topic of today. So we have the Foreman manual. It's hosted in a GitHub repository. It's part of the bigger website. And I'm not going to dive too deep into this because it's the old thing and I don't want to look too much backwards. I want to look forwards. But I do want to mention that the Foreman application itself, it links to the website. You might see in various places the documentation button. This one I took from the roles page, but there are all over the place. It's really a large manual. It's a single manual. Everything is in there. And there's a small Git quick start guide, just enough to get you started, but nothing more. And then there's various plugins. Plugins highly depend on the plugin maintainers, and quality varies strongly. For example, for many plugins, it's missing latest versions, etc. Not in a great place. We also have such latest and such nightly symlinks, and they're managed in the Foreman info repository using Puppet. Also not great. It makes release workflow a bit trickier. Just today I noticed, for example, we didn't update the latest to 3.7 yet. So things we can improve there, especially in the branching process. In the current website, everything is a single branch. It's big directory where you basically copy files. Reviewing a multi-thousand line patch is not really doable. So branching is painful. You probably have seen this. I won't go too deep into it. By now, everyone has seen the architecture screenshot, and it's old. I don't like it. I hate that the report specs EMC label is not aligned to the arrow it's supposed to be on from Puppet to Foreman, but nobody's source, and it hasn't been updated in a long time. So one of those things we can definitely improve. Plugins, as I mentioned, it really varies. We list some plugins we've dropped, for example, Graphite. We list some things that aren't plugins for maintain, for Ansible modules, for operation collections. And for various plugins, we don't list the right versions, etc. This is not in a good state, which is a bad service to the users. And now look at the new things, which are in a better place, hopefully. Introducing the Foreman documentation. This is the result of open sourcing Red Hat satellite documentation back in 2019. Huge kudos to Lukash and Melanie. They kicked off the work and created the repository, and that's a great start. We're not really there yet. It's still a long way out, but we've made incredible progress. It's actually multiple guides. That's quite a big difference compared to the previous one. We have multiple flavors, which I'll get to explain later. But and there's a very small web front end that's already an index, and it uses ASCII-doc. So what's the current status? It's a primary source for Katello, because it was branched off from satellite documentation, which assumes Katello is present, and that means it's very much focused on the content part, and that made it very suitable for Katello. So Katello have removed their plugin page and actually moved it to the new documentation, but it's still experimental for Foreman. Mostly because it's not really ready yet. As I mentioned, the old documentation assumed it was all based on Katello. If Katello is not present, that's still a big issue. I will get into it later. But the good news is that it's actually the upstream for Red Hat Satellite and ATIX Ocarina. That means we can actually document features while they're still being developed, and we've actually already done that, which I thought was a major milestone. When you're documenting features that only live in nightly and not even in upstream release, that's just the place you want to be in. And I can say we're there now, and I'm quite proud that at all the people who've put in the hard work to get there. So this is a landing page. I think this can still use a lot of improvement. I would like some opinions how to get there. But this is where we are today. We list the current versions, we list the unsupported releases. On the top bar, you might notice we have the flavors. We have the Foreman on Enterprise Linux, Foreman on Debian, and Katello on Enterprise Linux, and the version selector. It's not great, but it's a decent start. And this is just a random manual I chose. You can notice that the top bar is consistent. You can easily switch back and forth between different manuals. That's it. It's using ASCII-Doc. ASCII-Doc, it was already mentioned in the first talk, which I quite liked. As said, it's more powerful than Markdown. It feels to me much closer to restructured text than Markdown. You can use attributes, which are like variables for programmers. There are macros where you can do repeatable things. There are conditionals. You can easily reuse with includes. And there's a good set of documentation available, which you might expect from a documentation tool, but still very nice to have. Attributes, quick example, you can use the colon name, colon, and then the value, and then later on you use it between braces. And the good thing is you can actually split this into multiple files, which you can again use it includes. So you can have a common file with your attributes, and then all over the place you use those attributes again. So when I talk about branching, for example, project version is one thing. When we branch, we change it in a single file, and all over the place the value changes, which is actually very, very useful and make the branching a lot less painful. And a small example, I took this one from ASCII-doc.org. You can see the general style. It looks similar to restructured text, in my opinion. Links are slightly different than Markdown, for example. Headers are slightly different, but overall, you can easily recognize it. And then the biggest difference compared to our current manual. The new manual, we have a lot of different guides. And there's reuse between them. For example, we have an installing a connected server guide. We have an installing disconnected guide. I'm not sure if we publish those in upstream just yet. But in downstream we do use it, and then there's reuse of a lot of components. So there are modules that you can include, and in assemblies you create how you want to lay it out. And this is not the deep dive into that. Red Hat documentation has a repository with modular documentation, how you do that, how to structure it, and that's the general style guide we follow. Then we have multiple flavors. In the old manual, there were things like, if you're on Debian, do this, if you're on Red Hat, do this. Yeah, there were some selectors which did work things, but it was never quite good. With a new style, we've chosen to build flavors. This is something we invented, and it's not really a modular thing or anything, it's just how we call it. So we have the Foreman on Enterprise Linux, Foreman on Debian, Katello, Satellite, and Ocarina. We actually include all of those builds in upstream. We don't do anything of that in downstream. I know Ocarina does some things quite a little bit different because of their build system, which is a bit different, but overall all the conditionals what's used in Satellite and Arduino and Katello, etc. That's all in upstream, which I think is very good. There's a lot of collaboration in that area, and I think that's the biggest improvement. So how does it look in practice? You can have an if-def Katello Satellite Arduino do X, if and-def do Y, and that's roughly the conditionals we use all over the place. But there's also other ones. For example, Satellite might want to link to official RHEL documentation for matters where in upstream we don't. These kind of things allow us to use the same source but then build multiple outputs, which is, I think, a nice improvement. You don't want to go too far with this. We should still keep in mind that the target maintainer of this is a technical writer, not a software engineer. It's not supposed to be a software engineering project, but it's nice to have these kind of things available. Another great aspect is collaboration. I already mentioned both Red Hat and ATIX. They use it as an upstream. There's every Monday we sync up, quickly discuss the current status and any ongoing issues, things you would like to get opinions on, etc. So nothing secret, but it's a very useful thing. That's one thing I always wonder about these kind of things is it excluding community? Could we do a better job? Like with the Linux team, we publish a summary every week. Maybe something we could do here as well. For now, I've not seen that much that is too relevant, but something to consider for the future. And on the other side, also in the repository itself, I see a lot more collaboration between writers and developers. Previously, very often it was a developer writing the documentation or a writer writing the documentation with little to no input. Nowadays, you typically have a writer describing the workflow, then the developer reviewing it, and you collaborate, you clarify where needed, giving you the best of both worlds. And the discussion typically happens within pull requests. This is just a regular GitHub flow. Anyone who's used to that will be used to it. We do the common things like checks. You simply build guide, and if you see if it even builds, simply does it compile or not. But the more interesting part, I think, is the link checker. Verifies that any links we have to external sites resolve. There's been some issues with that in the past where, for example, the external sites were not responding or because they were offline, those kind of things. But overall, I've been quite happy with it. And there's also preview with diff values. And that's actually something that Evgeny wrote. I think this is one of the coolest features that we have. The build that we did, we actually publish it at a live URL. You can just click it, navigate as a regular website, and see all the output that you would normally have. Read the whole document in context without all the conditionals, etc. You don't even need to manually parse ASCII-doc in your head and think about output. It's just there. It also tells you which files are affected. You can navigate directly to them, and it shows you the diff. Diffs are sometimes not very readable because it changes all the indexes, for example, for the chapters. The diff is quite large then. But overall, it is a massive improvement if you want to review a PR and see what's happening. Another small detail that I really like, there's one comment, and the comment is updated every single time you push. So there's no new comment for every single one, which my inbox greatly appreciates. Because very often you will push the review comments, address them, and it will render a new preview. It will update the comment, and there's no index spam or inbox spam. So awesome feature. This is all built using GitHub Actions. It's all in the repository itself. You can look at it and play with it. It's quite nice. Small tip to developers: use this to review your instructions. You can be the user. Very often, and I work in a platform team, so very often we integrate many different source repositories, and it's hard to see the big picture. And if you actually review some document, some procedure, then you can jump in and be the user. Very often I would see, for example, a step where I think this is stupid. This is something that the code should do. We shouldn't require a human to do it. So I would file some issues and plan the future iteration to make it even better. I've also found a bug here and there because I was reviewing it and pretending to be a user and going through it and saying, I found some issues. So this is a great place to sort of do that whole quality check and look at it from a bird's eye view. Now the Git structure is much more common to projects you would expect. We have a master branch where we have the nightly documentation, and we have the website, and then we have x.y stable branches. So there's 3.7, 3.6, etc. So when there's a new release, it's a simple Git branch procedure, and that's so much better than we used to have, because now you can use simple Git cherry pick to pick changes back to stale branches, and that's such an improved workflow compared to the old website that I liked a lot. And we do cherry picks quite far back because it's also used as an upstream for Satellite, which has a much longer term support. We typically do cherry picks to much older branches than when Foreman is actually supported, which I would think is still a good thing for the end users, even though it shouldn't affect them because you should upgrade, but it's nice to know it's there. And one thing I will note is I would like to separate the web page from the nightly guides itself. So master is just the nightly branch, and that's just a web branch, but that's a future improvement. Which brings me to the next topic, the future. I think the big thing to do is align on a single repository. The new documentation should replace the old one, and we should migrate it all. Clear benefits in a single place. For the reader is great because there's clarity. Having documentation in two places is just confusing. But as a maintainer, it's also much better because I don't need to maintain it in two places anymore. Today, we maintain the release notes in two places. That's just additional work that we don't want to do. We can spend our time better on actually writing software. So how do we get there? We have to deal with the Katelloisms, and Katelloisms are things that Katello does different from Foreman. Some examples, the smart proxy port in Foreman is 8443, and in Katello it's 1990. In a smart proxy on Katello, there's Apache present because there's a pulp instance where Apache is a reverse proxy. The whole SL structure is quite different. All those things, they end up in documentation as well. Some of these things we would like to tackle them at the platform level. So for example, the smart proxy port, we've been doing preparation work to align that and change Katello, the smart proxy port, to 8443, or at least put them all on the same port. So we've done the preparation work there, for example, to remove, the reason there was 1990 is there was a conflict between the ports. And the other servers, we actually moved it to port 443. So now we've given users a migration window so they can upgrade. And soon we should be ready to move Katello to the same port. But until we are there, the documentation still should work. That's something we need to reflect. And we can use conditionals, but it's still something we need to do. Another thing is Debian documentation. There's quite a few things that we have slightly different on Debian, or it's not supported on Debian. For example, we don't publish the OpenSCAP plugin on Debian, so the OpenSCAP documentation instructions should probably be hidden. Those kind of things. And we should map all existing documentation, so you can actually redirect users to the new location, which is also important because Foreman itself, it has those documentation buttons I mentioned. So we need to enhance Foreman to link to the new documentation as well. We need plugin infrastructure, so plugins can also do the same thing. Then all plugins who link to documentation need to be updated. And as a small note, Red Hat has some branding where we map it to the commercial documentation. We need to do the same thing there. So this is a bigger project I'm currently investigating. As I mentioned, there is an RFC in Discourse which talks about these things. There's some preparation work, but it's a big thing. But overall, something that the project will benefit greatly from. Other things on guides. We can review the existing ones. Some of them have been written quite a while back. Some of them might be could use more capabilities of multiple guides. For example, I've been making a proposal for a DNS integration guide or a DSP integration guide. Today, those topics are spread out. For example, the Infoblox DNS integration guide is in the provision host guide, whereas the other integration parts are in the installing server guide. You would expect that in a single guide, I think. And that's something that I've been talking about and proposing to the writers. And something else, the landing page, we can improve that. I think it's not a great thing. Today, we can make it clear. If you have multiple guides, you need to know what the guides are, what they're talking about, those kind of descriptions. We don't have that today. Definitely some room for improvement. Possibly use Antora, which is a build system. ATIX already used that. And that also allows you to write the landing page. And that might be a nice combination. We've been looking into it, possibly in the future. And I'm seeing I'm sort of on time, so I'll wrap this up. GitHub users, I think we can improve here. These are more common in the project wide. For example, automated cherry picks. We've been looking at how the Pulp project does it. They already use a tool called Patchback, which does the cherry picks for you. It's a bot on GitHub. That would improve some things. I won't go to it too much because I'm on time. And I think we could go through the open issue and PR and do it in some regular triage to close them out. Yeah, I think that's quickly what I want to talk about. I'm not sure if there's any questions.
So I brought myself back. Yeah, I also recognized no questions. There was great feedback that everyone is quite happy with this. This is also the right time not to only thank you for the talk, also for Maximilian and all the others who worked here on the documentation from my part. There is, thanks to Quirm, the link for the RFC also in the chat. I was not sure if I can paste anything from the system where I prepared it, because I saw the screen always blurring out if I moved anything. So I did not want to interfere too much with the stream. There was one comment from Quirm, I think. He's thinking the landing page is a barrier to the usage. Do you have any opinion on this, Ewoud?
I agree. It needs improvement. I'm not sure how it should look like. I'm not a designer and I'm very bad at that area. If anyone has suggestions, proposals, they're more than welcome.
And there's also a new question now. Who can you see leading this effort on pull requests and GitHub issues?
That's a good question. Anyone who's interested is welcome to join. I've written some proposals in the. It's something that I would like to evaluate soon. But there's a Discourse post on updating the stable branches strategy, where I linked to the bit. And as for the links, you might not have seen it, but I emailed you the slides with all the links in it. Maybe you could have copy pasted from there.
Yeah, I will try to upload all the slides to the community at the end. I hope this works to send this to Discourse, or I will upload them somewhere else so everyone interested can download them later.
Yeah, but there's a post on Discourse, and we can link it after the event where we raised it. And if everyone's interested in collaborating here, more than welcome.
Yeah. yeah, I will post it later. Just let me check, because YouTube is always some seconds behind. If there is another question, no, only people saying thanks, or now there came one up. It's also just feedback that the documentation is definitely getting better, so the effort is really well done. So I'm not sure, no message here, no message there, no message in the channel for the talk. So Ewoud, thanks for your time, thanks for the talk, and I will mute you again and switch to the layout with only me. So now we have one last talk. It's from Samir from the content, for the Katello content team. So at least I announced it. Now it is from Samir and Ian from the Katello content team, because Ian recorded some demos before he left for vacation and added it to Samir's talk. And also Chris Roberts sent me a small demo from the Katello subscription team. So I just added it after the talk. So we have one big block with all the updates from Katello content and subscription team. So enjoy the last talk, and we will have live Q&A afterwards. Then I will wrap up and hopefully also join the social event afterwards.
Hello, everyone. I am Samir. I work with the Katello team, and I'm here to present some updates around content views that we have been working on over the last year or so. All right, so let's get started. Let me go over the setup here first. So I have a content view here, demo, and I have some repositories. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, add these repositories, and if I go to versions, I don't have any versions here. So let me try and publish. So you should be familiar with the screen if you have used Katello recently. So this is the regular publish screen. Lets you go ahead and publish. So let's do that. So there are three main topics I'm going to cover with this demo. I'm getting to the first one, which is a new functionality where we try to calculate if a content view needs publish when you are trying to publish it, so you don't make unnecessary publishes as such. So let's go with that. So here we have a version we published just now. It got all the repositories and contents. So this is version 1. So right now, since I've not made any changes since the publish, if I go to publish a new version, I'll see this message which says no available repository or filter updates. So this tells the user that they could choose not to publish this content view if they don't want a version which is exactly the same as the previous version. They can still go ahead and publish. We don't stop them on the UI. So let's go back. So here's this banner. Let's check Hammer. So this is content view ID 5. So how this looks in Hammer is, let's see. So Hammer content view publish. So there's a new flag here called publish only if needed. So what this does is checks the content view, sees if there are any updates available on the content view, or any of the repositories, if any filters have been created. So anything that would require a new publish to get new content into a version, those would be considered as needing changes that need publish. So only if there are such changes will you be able to publish if you pass this flag as true, which is publish only if needed. So right now, my content view, for example, did not have any changes. So if I were to pass this flag as true, so it should not publish a new version of the content view. So you see this message could not publish the content view because it does not need a publish since there are no audited changes since the last publish. So what are some of the changes that might need a new publish? So those would be things like if you were to remove a repository which was present in a previous version, if you were to add a new filter, for example. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's create, let's say, a Debian filter. Debian, and let's make it exclude. And let's add a package. Let's exclude Odin. You know, this package exists in one of the repositories. Let's make sure. So yes, there is a package that matches this filter. So that particular package will be excluded from the next content view version that's published. So let's go look at versions. So now you see this icon here, which tells users that updates are available. So repositories and or filters have changed. And in this case, we did change the filters. Now, if I were to go to publish new version, I don't see that banner, which tells me that we can just go ahead and publish this normally. And if I try the same command in Hammer, it should publish a new version for me since there are changes and a publish is required. So let's see that. So you'll notice a task did get started. Finish. So let's refresh. And we should see a new version here, which would be version 2. This icon, which tells the user that a filter was applied, or filter or several filters were applied when this version was published. So this does not equal to what actually remove the filtering from already published versions. And what deleting that filter actually did was make a publish necessary on this content view to get that content included, the Debian package that we had excluded. So now we have this needs publish icon here again. So some other changes. So we went over filter deletion. We can add or remove repositories. There are changes that you can make here, specifically solving dependencies that would impact the content that gets into the new version, which would require a new publish to reflect those changes. So that was all about this needs publish and how we determine that. So let's dig into this applied filters icon. So this right here tells me that filter was applied when this version was published. I can go look at filters tab and there are no filters. So what I can do in this case, if I wanted to actually look at what filters were applied, is go back to Hammer. Let me just check the ID of this version. So version 11. So what I would do here is look at this content view version. So we want the info ID 11, and let's look at that new flag here just quickly. So There's this new flag here, which is called include applied filters. What this does is when you show the info of a version, it will also include all the filters that were applied at the time that version was published. So let's try that. See how that shows up. So include applied filters, true. So here you have a new section called applied filters. So this shows me all the filters that are applied. So in this case, there was only one filter with only one rule. So this is what it shows. And it also keeps track of dependency solving at the time the CV was published for that version. So in this case, depth solving was turned off when the CV was published. And there was one Debian type filter rule, which was of type exclusion, because inclusion is no here. It had one rule, which was to exclude a package with name Odin. And that is how we got to this version. So this is how you check what filters were applied. And these filters do not exist in Katello anymore. This is just a JSON representation of the filters that existed when the version was published. All right. So on the UI, let me just create a dummy filter quickly. And so on the UI, when you have filters on the CV, which will apply when you publish a new version, when you actually go ahead to publish a new version, we inform the user in the review screen of the publish wizard that filters are going to be applied to this content view version. Sorry. And there's also a new column here, which lets you check out all the filters that will be applied. So you can click on this link and check the current state of filters on the content view. All right, and that was all about filters. There's one last thing. So there's this compare functionality, which we added last year, which lets you compare the content inside of two different versions. So right now I have a version 1 and version 2. Let me go ahead, compare. So this takes me to the screen, which has all of these tabs. These look very similar to what the versions view, the version info view of a content view version has. And so here you can see we have repositories, and all of these repositories were present in both of these versions. So nothing changed around repositories. So here I know what changed. So we did create an exclude filter for Debian packages. So if I go to Debian packages view, I can see that there's one Debian package which is not present in version 2, which is Odin, which was a filter that we had created. You can quickly filter out all the different content here. So for example, here, Odin is different between the two versions. And if I look for the same different view for other content types, all of those will show up as empty because all of those content was the same. So those will show up when I choose the same filter. And I think that covers most of the important stuff that I wanted to demo today. Thank you all for watching.
Hi folks, my name is Ian Ballou and I'm a Katello developer. I'm not able to be here in person today, but I hope you enjoy my demo. Today I'll be showing you the new alternate content sources feature. I say it's new, but it's been around since Katello 4.7, so some of you may have been able to try it out. Alternate content sources, or ACSs for short, define paths to alternate repositories for downloading content at synchronization time. For an example, with an ACS, you can sync a repository in Katello but have the RPMs come from a file system backup connected to your foreman instance. While the content is downloaded from the path defined in the ACS, the metadata still comes from the upstream repository. The upstream repo is the source of truth. Any repository that you could sync with Katello can be used as an alternate content source. This means file system paths work as well as web paths. An alternate content source can be deployed to any smart proxy, including one installed on the foreman server itself. Alternate content sources must be refreshed before they work. We also have a weekly cron job to refresh all alternate content sources. There are 3 kinds of alternate content sources in Katello: custom, simplified, and Red Hat update infrastructure, or RUI for short. And you should see in the UI now the 3 types that you can choose between and a small explanation about what each one is. So custom ACSs must be fully defined by the user. That means that network paths and authentication credentials must all be manually entered. These custom ACSs offer the most flexibility. Simplified ACSs require users to only define the products that become translated into ACSs. Network paths and authentication credentials, for example, will come from the repositories within the products. Simplified ACSs are the most useful for having smart proxies download content directly from an upstream source. And that's really useful if the connection between the foreman and the smart proxy is slower than the connection from the smart proxy to some upstream server. Red Hat update infrastructure ACSs are especially useful for having content downloaded from a RUI instance. Since consuming content from RUI requires special certificates and setup, the RUI ACS just offers some help with configuring that within the foreman UI itself. Okay, I'll now show a couple of demos. First up, I will demo using alternate content sources to download content directly from an upstream source. So in my environment here, I have a smart proxy mirror that is syncing from the development lifecycle environment. So I'll just show you here in my smart proxies. This is the mirror that I'm talking about right here, which is CentOS 8 Stream Foreman Proxy. And now I'm going to create a simplified ACS so that my CentOS Stream 9 product can be synced directly from the upstream URL rather than from the foreman instance itself. Okay, so we're going to go to the alternate content sources page. We're going to add a source. We're going to go to simplified. We want yum. You can also make it for file repo types. So simplified. Now the name, I'll just call it simplified CentOS ACS. And now I'll pick the smart proxy that I want it deployed to, which is the foreman proxy one. And I'm going to select use HTTP proxies because I'm going to use this to prove that the files are being downloaded from the upstream server. And I have a squid proxy set up. I'll show that in a second. So here we have our products. I'm going to select the only one we have, which is the CentOS Stream 9 product. And here we have a bit of a review, so you can look over what you are creating, and then we're going to add it. So now after I've added this, I just need to refresh the ACS, which there are numerous ways to do it, but I'll do it here by clicking refresh source. And then we'll have a task. In Pulp, this is essentially a synchronization task. If you look at it here in Dynflow, you can look at this task that has refresh. If you scroll through it, it looks very similar to a sync task. However, in Pulp, one refresh task is n individual repository sync tasks. So now that the refresh task is done, we are able to use the alternate content source. And we can just take a look in my terminal here. We can see there were some connections to the repositories that are in the ACS. These connections should be for downloading the metadata and syncing it as Pulp needs. Okay, so now that we have the ACS created and refreshed, we can now sync it. So as I said before, I have a squid proxy set up that will show you the content being downloaded from the upstream repository instead of from the foreman instance. Okay, so let's now initiate the smart proxy sync. I'm going to go over to my smart proxy here. And now I'm going to make sure the smart proxy is set to the immediate download policy so that all the RPMs will be downloaded for the sake of the demo. Now we'll go back into the smart proxy and we will run a complete sync. And while the complete sync is going, we can look at the logs here. So here we can see that downloads are actually occurring from mirror.stream.centos.org. Ordinarily, a smart proxy sync will only occur between the foreman instance and the smart proxy itself. But here we can see that plenty of content in varying degrees are being downloaded from mirror.stream.centos.org. In the second demo, I will show how to sync a repository using a local file system backup. Remember that the repository on the file system needs to be syncable with Katello, so the file system structure must be a proper repository. Okay, so I have a repository here named zoo, and it's pointing to a repository that we like to use for testing. I downloaded this repository locally on the machine to represent a file system backup. And what I want to do is I want to sync this repository, but rather than download the RPMs, again, I want to have the RPMs copied from the file system backup. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a custom alternate content source that refers to the file system backup that I have. We're going to refresh it, and then once we sync this repository, the RPMs will be copied over. And just like last time, I'll be using a squid proxy that I have here, assigned as the HTTP proxy for the repo, to prove that the content is being synced from the actual file system backup and not from the server itself. Now, the metadata should be downloaded from the upstream server. However, the content units should not. And that's why I've also set the download policy here to be immediate, so that the RPMs will be downloaded at sync time. Okay, let's create the ACS now. So we're going to go back to our alternate content sources page, and we're going to add a source. The source here is going to be a custom one. It's going to be a yum source again. And here I'll call it custom zoo ACS to match the repository I created. Okay, so this time the smart proxy that we want will be this one, which is the smart proxy that's on the foreman itself. So I'll scoot that over. This time I don't need to say use HTTP proxies because, well, it's a file system copy. There won't be any traffic to send over the alternate content source. We're going to hit next. Okay, so the base URL here, instead of HTTP, we're going to be doing file. And then it is going to be under var lib pulp import. And I just need to check the file system path. So I'm going to open up my terminal. So the file system path that we want is var lib pulp imports, and then the repository name is needed errata. So let me copy and paste this. Now, if you want to, you can set subpaths. So in my case, I'm just using one base URL, so I don't need any subpaths. However, let's say you have one base URL, and then in that URL, in that directory, you have many other repositories. You could set the subpaths here so that you could use each repository within a base path. And we don't need any credentials here since it's all on the file system. So we can review our details. The most important thing here is our base URL is correct. And now we're going to add it. And then now that we've added it, we just need to refresh the source. And I'll refresh it just like we did last time. And then we can just check that the refresh is happening properly by going to the page over here. Great, the refresh was nice and quick. So now we're going to go over to our repository. Now before I sync it, let me pull up, this is our squid log here, so we should see nothing on the squid log, except perhaps a connection to the upstream repository to grab the metadata. Here we go. We're going to sync the repository. I've got the log up here. So we've synced the repo. Now let's see, how many connections do we have here? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's much less than the number of RPMs that are actually on the server. So I think we can safely assume that this is for the metadata itself and rather than for the RPMs. So what the sync did under the hood was it grabbed the metadata from the upstream server, so it treated that as the source of truth, and then it copied the RPMs from my file system backup into Pulp and associated them with the repository. Okay, this now concludes my demo. If you would have any more questions about the topic that aren't answered during the Foreman birthday party, please ask these questions on the Foreman community website and tag Katello. And I'd just like to give a big thanks to everyone who helped make this event happen, and happy birthday to Foreman.
Happy birthday, Foreman. So my name's Chris Roberts. I'm from the Katello team, our subscription team on the Katello Team Phoenix. So a couple of things I wanted to demonstrate today or show off. The new thing about simple content access and how it does not reflect the manifest anymore if you are using Red Hat subscriptions. So I'll go over just a few things about that. And then secondly, I'll show the new work that Jeremy just got in around custom products being disabled by default. So we'll go ahead and start with the simple content access piece. So this is a brand new organization. I have just freshly installed it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to content and subscriptions here. And you're going to see that by default, the organization is in simple content access mode. If you upgrade and your organization's in entitlement mode, it will honor that and keep that change. It's just for new organizations only. If you wanted to flip your current organization though, and you went to manage manifest, this is where it used to be for the longest time, and we have moved that now. So that is under, if you go to the manage organizations, you can see that we have simple content access enabled. And if you click edit, we can turn that off. The other thing that we added was if you create a new organization, you can toggle that checkbox now. So we're just going to make a new organization called Foo. We'll keep the simple content access off. The reason why we moved it from the manage manifest modal is because Candlepin decoupled that change out of the manifest operations. So now it is a local setting on the Candlepin instance, and it no longer reflects what the customer portal says on that manifest. And I'm going to demonstrate that here. So I'm going to switch back to my SCA org, and I have a manifest here called no SCA. We can see that SCA is turned off, and it has just one subscription on it. So I'm going to go ahead and import that subscription or that manifest and show you that we are still, that no matter what the customer portal says, it does not honor that anymore. It's just a local setting on the Candlepin instance. So it's just changed, like I said, from that setting. So we're going to go ahead and manage manifest, and we're going to choose a file. We're going to go with the no SCA manifest. And like I said, this only has one subscription on it, so it should be pretty quick to import. All right. So you can see here that we have one subscription, as I said, and you can see here that the organization still is in simple content access mode. So regardless of what the manifest says, I can toggle this on and off. It will not read that. So if I did want to change this organization though, now we can. Let's change it to reflect what that manifest says. We'll go into the default organizations, and we'll go into edit, and we'll turn off the simple content access flag. That will run. We can see that simple content access is off. Now, depending on how many hosts and subscriptions you have, this might take a little bit. Since this is a brand new install, it's going to be super quick. And we can check on that by if we go to the foreman task page. We can see that disable simple content access is there. And if we look at the Dynflow console, we can see that it kicked off our request. Everything is there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my simple content access back on. All right. So now I want to show, let's go back to the products page. This is what Jeremy added. So by default, let's see here. Yeah, so custom. So I have a custom product here and 2 repositories, just random stuff. So how custom products used to work in the past was if you had simple content access off, they would have their own subscription. So this one I would have a subscription for Red Hat, and I would have a subscription for custom, and we can see that here. And what you would do then to manage that is if you wanted a host to have the custom product, you would just go in and add that subscription to the host. But with simple content access now, we don't have a subscriptions tab for a host anymore. So you can see that here. If we go to host and all host, and I go into here, it's gone. And in the legacy UI, if we go there, we can see that since this simple content access is on, we don't have the subscription page anymore. So by default, that would give all hosts access to those custom products. Now those custom products they're not architecture restricted or anything, so every host is going to get that. And so we have added enhancements to that. If you go to products, and I'll show that first. We're just going to click on this zoo repo right here. We can restrict to architecture, and we can restrict to OS version. So there are some granularity controls that you can put on that, but by default, all hosts that are registered now are going to get the custom products enabled. So what was added was if we go to all hosts, and I click on my host here, and we go into content and repository sets, we can see that I have one flag overridden is enabled, and by default, all products are custom or disabled. So if I were to register a new host, we would see both of these as disabled. So if I were to, for example, reset to default right here on this guy, you can see that it's disabled. If you do override it, you can see that it has a flag next to it. So we're just going to go ahead and reset that to default. And how this works is basically we honor what the host have. So for example, if a host has, if you have hosts that are registered and they have custom products enabled, what we do is we go through and we set a override to enabled on that. Whoops, wrong button there. Override to enabled. And for any products that are not on that host or any repos that are not on that host, what we do then is we just set that to disabled. But we honor what the host is. So those are some of the changes that we have. If there's any questions, just feel free to ask. Thanks all.
So thanks, Samir, for providing a nice overview of the new details added to the content views. There were many small details I did not recognize before you have demoed it here. Also thanks to Ian for the in-depth demo for the alternative content source, and also for Chris on the simple content access, what was a really hot discussed topic on the community. So thanks to all of you three for your talk. And I have Samir also on the panel for live Q&A. So give me a second and I will add audio and your stream. And now you should be live. So I have not seen any questions. Not on YouTube, not on the
Everyone.
chat. So yeah, my personal question was, with all these details done, what is next? What will we see in the future? Samir, do you hear us? Yeah.
Sorry, I got confused by the audio on my tabs. Was there a question? Yeah.
Yeah, there was no question in the channels, so I would simply ask you the question with all the details we have seen now, what has done the last year, what is going to come in the next year, so what's the future?
So there's a lot of work going on around SCA itself. There's also a new feature around assigning hosts multiple content views that should be landing sometime in the future. There are improvements planned around capsule syncs that I'm excited about. So we should be seeing some UX improvements around that as well. Those are the main things I can remember on the top of my head. Yeah, there should be plenty more.
I'm looking on the screen and I don't see any further questions. So this would be really a short Q&A. So I hope this is because everyone is happy with Katello and all the content view and so on now. So Ewoud joined. I'm not sure if he joined to do a last minute question, like he did a last minute talk. Let's wait some seconds because also YouTube is always 10-15 seconds behind. If no question comes up, but Ewoud is writing, so let's see. He's just here to answer the questions in more detail from his talk. So yeah, Samir, thanks for the talk. Thanks for being here. If you have any last, no, not any last words. I think this is a wrong term in English, but if you have any words for the community, feel free to talk to us. And if not, I will switch and wrap up.
Yeah, no. As always, feel free to reach out to the team on communityforeman.org. And thanks, Dirk, for setting all of this up.
So thank you, Samir, and bye. I will switch to my being full screen. And yeah, I have to thank everyone for the talk. Everyone who had worked on this in the background, so my colleagues at NetWays, the guys at Ethics, and also on Red Hat, so Foreman project, Katello project. There were more people involved in the background than you have seen here on the stream. I hope everyone enjoyed this talks, enjoyed the conference, and yeah, I hope we will have this next year as an in-person conference again. I'm not sure. Next year it should be on Ethics to organize it, and I hope we will not have any pandemic coming back or anything else, so we can have this as in-person event again. we will see next year it's ATX. In 2 years it will be again on my shoulders to organize this event. So I wish everyone a nice evening, or because we have also some American colleagues, a nice afternoon, I think. So I will just end the stream here and will join also work adventure. So happily to have any talks there. So let's have some discussions there, or just meet and see everyone again after, in some cases, 2 years, because of all this what happened in the last 2 years. So bye, and this is the end of the stream.